The first sign something was wrong with my son was how hard he was breathing. Not loud, fast, quiet, controlled, like a man trying to stop himself from breaking in public. That's how the night started, with my son sitting across from me at his in-laws' dinner table, chest rising too quickly, eyes darting too often, hands trembling in ways he couldn't hide. I'm Josephine Blake. And this is the night everything in my life shifted into a place I never thought I'd have to survive. The dining room was too bright. The chandelier hummed above us with a sharp, buzzing sound that felt like a warning. The air carried the smell of roasted chicken and expensive wine, but something sour threaded underneath it. Fear. His fear. It rolled off him like heat. His wife, Sierra, sat beside him with a smile too smooth, too still. Patricia Hayes poured wine slowly, her eyes never leaving my son's face. And Leonard Hayes, he watched my boy with the same quiet tension men use when they've already decided the next move. Then it happened. My son's hand slipped under the table and clamped around mine. Tight, cold, desperate, not affection, not comfort, a grip. His thumb tapped my wrist 3 times. Quick, sharp, frantic. The chandelier flickered above us. A fork clattered across the table. Someone laughed too loudly, but all I could hear was the trembling pulse beating against my palm. He slid something against my hand. His phone, hidden under the napkin, he tucked into my lap like a burning secret he needed me to hold before it swallowed him whole. He didn't look at me when he whispered, "Mom, don't argue. Just accept it." His voice broke at the edges. His knee bounced under the table, fast, uncontrollable. I breathed, barely moving my lips. "Harlan, baby, what are you doing?" He shook his head once. A tiny sharp motion. His fingers tightened around mine. Across the table, Leonard rose silently and walked into the hallway. He didn't excuse himself, didn't smile. He just left like a man checking on a plan. Sierra kept cutting her chicken in tiny, perfect squares, but her eyes never left my son. Patricia held her wine glass like she was timing something. Something was dangerously wrong in that room. My son's thumb moved under the napkin, sliding across the screen. A faint buzz vibrated into my lap. Another buzz. Then another. He was doing something irreversible. His breathing hitched. "Mom," he whispered, "I only trust you." My chest tightened. The lights blurred at the edges. My heart stuttered in a way that made my whole body go cold. I leaned in. "Please don't pull me into anything dangerous. I'm begging you." I touched his hand, and he finally lifted his eyes to mine. They were wet, broken, terrified. "Mom, I might be in danger." My mouth went dry. My pulse hammered in my ears. Every instinct a mother has screamed at once. If you're listening to me right now, just let me know where you're watching from. What happened next is the part my heart still hasn't healed from. My son didn't speak again. Not a single word. Leonard returned from the hallway with a stiff, controlled expression, like everything was unfolding exactly how he wanted it to. Sierra's shoulders tensed. Patricia smoothed her napkin with a small, satisfied motion. Then my son stood, too fast. His chair scraped the floor sharply, slicing the room into silence. He cleared his throat, forcing a shaky smile. "Long day. I need some air." His voice trembled on the last word. Sierra's jaw twitched. Leonard froze. Patricia blinked slowly, like a woman counting seconds. My son leaned down, kissed the top of my head, and whispered, soft, trembling, "I'll call you later." He walked out. No one stopped him. No one called after him. The door closed behind him. And that was the last time I ever saw my son alive. The moment I stepped outside that house, the air felt different, thicker, heavier, like it knew something I hadn't caught up to yet. I held my son's phone tight in my purse, but it felt like it was burning through the leather. I didn't look at the screen. I didn't breathe right. I just walked to my car, sat there, and pressed Harlan's name before my seatbelt even clicked. Ring, ring, voicemail. His voice played, warm, calm, recorded long before fear ever touched him. It hit my chest like a hammer. I hung up and called again, and again. By the fourth call, my hands were shaking so badly I pressed the wrong contact twice. I wiped my palm on my skirt and tried again. Nothing changed. He wasn't picking up. The silence felt wrong, too wrong for a night like this. I drove home on autopilot, every red light stretching longer than the one before it. The house felt empty when I walked in. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't want brightness. I wanted answers. I sat on the edge of my couch and replayed the dinner over and over, his cold hand, his trembling voice, that quiet whisper he used like someone might hear him if he breathed too loud. I remembered how my voice snapped a little when I told him not to drag me into anything. I hadn't meant to sound annoyed. I was scared. I was caught off guard. But regret doesn't wait for forgiveness. It punishes first, explains later. I called again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. I pressed the phone to my forehead and closed my eyes. I could feel the guilt crawling up my throat, thick and bitter. I should have followed him out. I should have insisted he talk. I should have taken his hand and walked him anywhere but back to that table. Hours passed without my permission. The house clock ticked in a strange rhythm. I kept my eyes on the front door, like he might walk through it. When my vision blurred, memories slipped in, slow, soft, uninvited, like the nights he used to tiptoe into my room when he was a little boy, whispering, "Mom, I had a bad dream. Can you stay with me?" And I always did. I curled behind him, rubbed his back, and hummed until he slept. For years, it was just the two of us, the late-night cereal when rent was tight, the way he clung to me at his father's funeral, the way he'd look at me when he accomplished something big, like he wanted my approval before anyone else's. My son always leaned on me. Why didn't he lean tonight? My chest tightened. I looked at the clock, 2:11 a.m., then 2:32, then 3 o'clock. At 3:47, my mind finally admitted something my heart didn't want. Harlan wasn't ignoring me. Something was wrong. But I didn't stop calling. Even when my battery flashed red, even when my fingers cramped, I kept pressing his name like repetition might bring him home. When the phone died, the silence felt alive. I plugged it in immediately and stared at the black screen until it flickered back to life. No missed calls. No texts. Not even a scene. On the last message I'd sent him, "Baby, please call me back. I'm worried." I didn't sleep. My eyes burned, but my body wouldn't let me rest. I sat by the window, watching the sky turn from deep black to charcoal to the faintest bruised blue. The world was waking up. Birds started chirping. Cars began humming down the road. The street lights faded one by one. Then my phone rang. A sound so sharp and sudden I almost dropped it. I grabbed it with both hands, heart pounding against my ribs. The caller ID wasn't Harlan's name. It was a number I didn't recognize. The pause before I answered felt like gravity, and then a voice, flat, official, cut straight through my chest. "This is the police. Your son has been found unresponsive." The drive to their house felt unreal, like the world had tilted, and I was the only one sliding off its edge. By the time I pulled into their street, flashing lights painted every window blue and red. Officers walked with practiced calm, their voices low, their steps measured. I parked crookedly behind a patrol car and stepped out before my door, even shut. A young officer approached, polite smile stretched too thin. "Ma'am, we're handling everything. Please stay behind the tape." I kept moving. My legs didn't recognize tape rules or orders. My son, Harlan, was somewhere in that garage, and nothing could stop a mother from reaching him. "Ma'am," he repeated, gently blocking me with his arm. "I'm his mother," I said, my voice so tight it barely escaped my throat. That word, mother, made him hesitate, but only for a breath. Before he could respond, she appeared. His wife, Sierra. Her face was wet, but her eyes weren't swollen. The tears sat on her skin like something placed there, not something earned. She looked at me, then immediately looked away, as if guilt were a bright light she couldn't face for too long. Her father, Leonard Hayes, stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, the other tucked casually in his pocket, a man too comfortable for a scene that should have shattered him. He turned to the same officer who tried to stop me. "You don't need her down here. The coroner's already seen him." "Already?" I gripped the side of a police cruiser just to steady myself. He walked toward me with a forced softness in his tone. "It was an accident," he said. "A tragic accident. Please go home and rest." I stared at him. His expression never changed. Sierra leaned into his arm like they were presenting a unified front, grief rehearsed and coordinated. The officer beside us cleared his throat and repeated what he'd clearly been told to say. "It appears your son accidentally left his car running in the garage. Carbon monoxide buildup. It's unfortunately common." Common? My son? In that garage he never used except for storage? But the words jammed in my throat, not because I believed them, because speaking them would have broken me open in front of people who didn't deserve to witness my pain. Another officer approached and tried guiding me toward the sidewalk. His grip was gentle, but his eyes were detached, the way people look when they're following a script, not a heart. I scanned the driveway, forcing my mind to focus. The garage door was closed. Too closed. Too perfect. Too final. Then I saw something else. His keys sitting on the hood of the wife's brother's car. Not dangling from the ignition. Not dropped on the ground. Placed neatly, like someone set them there intentionally. The brother walked up quickly and snatched them. He startled when he realized I was watching him. He looked at Leonard and whispered something so quietly most people would have missed it. But grief sharpens hearing. At least he signed. Sign what? My heartbeat thumped hard enough to blur my vision, but I kept my eyes steady. Leonard placed a hand on his son's shoulder, subtle, controlled, like a man reminding another to stay quiet. Then he turned back to me. "We'll handle everything from here," he said, voice wrapped in a calm that made my skin crawl. "You should be with family." I didn't move. My legs refused. The officer near me tried again. Ma'am, please. The scene is secure. Scene. Secure. Accident. Their words piled on top of each other. Clean, prepared, practiced. Sierra wiped her cheek, still without swollen eyes. He must have been so tired, she whispered. The sentence didn't match her face. An investigator rolled the stretcher toward the coroner's van. A white sheet covered the body I brought into this world with my own hands. My son's shape beneath that cloth broke something inside me that will never repair. I stepped back, my breath trembling. I reached for my purse, needing to anchor myself to something before I collapsed. My phone buzzed. I looked down, barely able to read through the blur. Bank alert, incoming deposit, $50 million. His house felt strange the moment I stepped inside. Not because it was quiet. Homes are supposed to be quiet after a loss, but because nothing in it felt touched by grief. No tissues scattered. No blankets left rumpled from sleepless nights. No signs of anyone breaking down. It looked staged, like a family waiting for guests instead of mourning Harlan, a son, a husband. His wife, Sierra, walked ahead of me, arms folded tight across her chest. She didn't look back to check if I was managing the steps or if I needed support. She just moved fast, as if the sooner she got this over with, the sooner she could return to whatever life she planned next. You can take this, she said, finally pointing to a box by the coat rack. It's just old things he didn't need anymore. Her voice held a thin sweetness that never reached her eyes. I bent slowly, hands trembling as I touched the cardboard. It was light, too light to hold 28 years of memories. I lifted the lid just an inch and saw papers, a few pens, a dried-out highlighter, and a black notebook with a worn spine. My chest tightened. She saw my fingers hover over it and shifted her weight. It's nothing important, she added quickly. Her tone made something flicker in my gut. I lowered the lid without removing anything. I'll look at it at home, I said softly. She nodded, but her jaw clenched just enough for me to notice. I carried the box out to the car, holding it carefully, like anything inside might shatter if I moved too fast. Once I sat behind the wheel, I closed the door and exhaled for the first time since stepping into that house. The air still held the cold sting of something wrong. I didn't drive off immediately. I placed the box on the passenger seat and slid the lid back again. The black notebook lay on top of everything else, unassuming, quiet, like it was waiting for me. I lifted it gently. Harlan's handwriting stretched across the first page, sharp, neat strokes he'd learned from copying my own handwriting as a boy. I ran my thumb across the ink. My breath caught. I opened to the next page. The entries were short, small, observational. They're suddenly interested in how I manage my accounts. Father-in-law keeps asking how much liquid cash I have access to. She wants all my passwords for emergencies. They keep asking what I'm worth. The words blurred for a moment, and I blinked hard until they sharpened again. Another page. Dad-in-law wants me to sign something tomorrow. Says it's family planning. Doesn't feel right. I pressed my palm over the page, steadying myself. These weren't dramatic confessions. These were breadcrumbs, small pieces of discomfort Harlan tucked away because he didn't want to accuse anyone without proof. That was just the kind of man he was. Thoughtful, cautious, fair. I flipped to another entry dated 2 weeks earlier. She asked again What would happen to my company if something happened to me? Why is this coming up so often? My heart thudded slow and heavy. I looked at the dates. Every entry happened before the dinner, before he placed that phone in my hand, before he whispered that he trusted only me. I held the notebook tighter. The air inside the car seemed to constrict around me. I flipped faster now, page after page, following the trail he didn't realize he was leaving. Then my fingers paused on the very last entry, dated the night of the dinner. His handwriting slightly rushed, ink darker like he pressed harder than usual. They want me to sign it tonight. I can't stall them anymore. Below that, a second line, shorter, heavier. But the money is safe with Mom now. The world around me stilled. The quiet inside that car felt like it was swallowing every sound in my body. He didn't write fear. He wrote preparation. He knew pressure was coming. He didn't know death would follow. A cold shiver slid down my spine. I didn't make it inside the house at first. I sat in the car with the journal open on my lap, the last entry burning into my eyes over and over. The ink was barely dry. His thoughts from just hours before the dinner. Thoughts Harlan never got the chance to say out loud. My fingers shook every time I traced the words. I lifted the journal to my chest and held it there, tight, almost crushing it, like maybe if I pressed hard enough I could pull him back through the pages. A sound escaped me, low, broken, the kind of cry that comes from a place deeper than lungs or throat. It came from my bones, from the part of me that raised him alone, loved him alone, protected him alone, and somehow still failed him at the one moment he needed me most, because I did argue with him. I told him not to involve me. I told him I didn't want trouble, and now every breath I took felt like punishment. I finally forced myself out of the car. When the sun began to dip, the house felt too quiet, too clean, too unaware that half my heart was gone. I placed the journal on my dining table and wiped my face, staring at the cover like it might open itself again if I blinked too long. I needed air, not comfort, just air. I stepped outside into the evening breeze, arms wrapped around myself. The street was calm, a few porch lights flickering on one by one. My neighbor, Mrs. Barker, shuffled out to water her plants. She noticed me standing there and hesitated. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said quietly, moving closer. "I didn't want to bother you." I nodded, unable to trust my voice. She lowered her watering can. I saw him last night, before everything happened. My head snapped toward her. Last night. She nodded again, slower this time. He was out here, on the sidewalk, pacing up and down like he couldn't breathe, right? He kept running his hand over his head and talking on the phone. Not yelling, just scared. Real scared. The ground under me felt like it shifted. He looked up when he saw me, she continued softly. But he didn't speak, just put his hand on his chest for a second, like something hurt in there. Her voice cracked. I should have asked if he was all right. I reached out and touched her arm, barely able to whisper, "You didn't do anything wrong." Harlan wore his fear quietly. He carried it alone. And now, the only person left to unravel, it was me. When I went back inside, I sat at the table with the journal and read every entry again, slowly this time, letting each line hit the spot it was meant to hit. These weren't warnings. They were breadcrumbs. Not declarations of danger, but signs of pressure. Small things building into something he couldn't name yet. Money questions. document pressure, uncomfortable conversations, shadows in rooms where love should have lived. The page corners were slightly bent at the back, like he used it more recently. I flipped to the pocket stitched inside the back cover, something I hadn't noticed earlier. My fingers brushed against a folded sheet tucked deep inside. I slid it out carefully. The paper was crisp, stiff, untouched. My pulse quickened as I unfolded it. It wasn't filled out. No signatures. No check marks. Just the title printed boldly at the top. Marital Asset Reallocation Agreement. Under it, in Harlan's handwriting, faint, almost ashamed. Think about this later. The room spun just slightly, not from surprise, but from confirmation. The pressure had been real. The fear had been real. The plan they pushed on him had been real. And he hid this in the one place he still felt safe. His own thoughts. I held the document with both hands. The edges cut lightly into my fingers, reminding me that this wasn't just paper. It was motive. It was timeline. It was proof. The journal lay open beside me, pages breathing his truth. The unsigned document trembled between my hands, heavy with meaning. By the second morning after the funeral, I had learned that grief doesn't sit still. It shifts, sharpens, finds new ways to cut you when you least expect it. I was sitting at the dining table, with the journal open in front of me, my fingers resting on the page with the unsigned document, when a hard knock rattled my front door. Not a grieving family kind of knock, a business knock. Firm, purposeful, expecting obedience. I closed the journal slowly, almost reverently, and slid it beneath a folder on the table. The knocking came again, louder this time, followed by a familiar voice calling my name like he owned the right to stand on my porch. I opened the door. Sierra's family stood there like a procession. Her father, Leonard Hayes, in front, her mother, Patricia Hayes, just behind him, and a man in a charcoal suit holding a leather folder under his arm. The lawyer. I recognized the posture before the profession. He held himself like someone accustomed to taking advantage of timing. None of them looked like people who buried a loved one 2 days ago. "May we come in?" Leonard said. He didn't wait for me to step aside. He just walked past me, his shoes tapping confidently against my hardwood floors. Patricia followed, clutching her purse with tight fingers. The lawyer entered last, closing the door gently, almost politely. The air tightened around us. I didn't offer seats. They took them. Leonard crossed one leg over the other and adjusted his cufflinks with slow precision. Patricia smoothed her blouse as if preparing for a luncheon, not a conversation with a grieving mother. Their lawyer placed his folder on the table and folded his hands like he was about to recite something rehearsed. I stood, quiet, present, watching. "Let's get straight to business," Leonard began. His voice carried authority that wasn't earned but demanded. "There are matters that need to be handled promptly. Financial matters." Patricia nodded, adding, "We don't want any confusion or delays. It's important everything is transparent. Transparent from people hiding behind polite cruelty." I kept my face still, letting silence make them uncomfortable. The lawyer cleared his throat. "We're here to review all financial movements your son made within the last 48 hours before his passing." The word passing fell out of his mouth like it was part of an invoice. I finally sat, folding my hands in my lap. My breathing stayed even, but inside I could feel something old and steel-like stirring awake. Leonard leaned forward. It's standard procedure. We need access to his accounts, statements, transfers, anything that changed hands. Patricia added softly, "You understand how marriage works. Everything he had was part of our household." Their entitlement filled the room like heavy smoke. I watched them, really watched them. Their eyes weren't grieving. They were calculating, scanning my face for weakness, for fear, for guilt they hoped to find. And for the first time, I saw what my son saw. Desperation. Not sorrow. Not love. Just a hunger for control. The lawyer opened his folder and slid a paper across the table, moving slowly, deliberately, like he wanted to savor the moment. "I'm sure you're overwhelmed," he said, voice softened for effect. "But everything your son touched financially before his death must be reviewed by the marital family." The marital family. They didn't even say his name. I didn't touch the paper. I didn't lean in. I didn't ask a single question. I let their own urgency push them forward. Leonard exhaled sharply, impatient with my calm. "We need full transparency from you. Immediately." Their tone, their posture, their certainty, it all confirmed what I already knew. They weren't here to grieve. They weren't here for closure. They were here for what they believed belonged to them. The lawyer sat up straighter, folded his hands, and spoke the line they'd clearly practiced. "You are legally required to surrender all assets he moved before his passing." The lawyer's words hung in the room like a blade, sharp, suspended, waiting to drop. I didn't flinch. I didn't shift. I didn't even look at the paper he placed in front of me. I stayed still. Silence can be loud when it's chosen. It can speak louder than anger, louder than explanation, louder than grief. And right now, my silence filled every corner of that room. Leonard Hayes leaned back, exchanging a quick glance with Patricia Hayes. They expected panic. They expected tears. They expected confusion. They got none of that. Just silence. Heavy, calm, controlled. The lawyer cleared his throat and tapped the paper gently. "We'll need your cooperation to move forward." I blinked once, slow, deliberate, but I said nothing. Sierra shifted irritably in her seat. "We drove all the way here," she snapped, the sweet tone from earlier dissolving. "The least you can do is respond." I folded my hands in my lap, letting the quiet gather weight between us. Leonard leaned forward again. "You understand your son's obligations, don't you?" His tone held a polished edge, the kind that cuts without raising its volume. Still, I said nothing. The lawyer tried a gentle approach. "We realize this is a difficult time, but matters like these can't wait. Transparency is important. Silence." This time, it made all three of them shift uncomfortably. Sierra's patience crumbled first. Her voice cracked sharp across the room. "He promised everything to me, not you." Patricia stiffened beside her. Surprised, she let the mask slip. Sierra didn't care. Her eyes were wild, desperate, clawing for something she believed she'd already possessed. I watched her, not with judgment, not with pity, with clarity. Her words didn't hurt me. They revealed her. She hadn't cried like a widow. She cried like someone watching opportunities slip through their fingers. Leonard grabbed her wrist, grounding her fast. "Calm down," he hissed. The lawyer leaned back, evaluating me with a new suspicion. "Mrs. Blake," he paused, choosing his next words carefully. We're trying to avoid complications. Silence. My mind slipped back to the last moment I held my son's gaze. His hand trembling under the table, his eyes red, swollen with fear. His whisper, so thin it barely existed. Don't trust anyone, please. Those words didn't echo. They rooted. They held me steady now, kept my voice inside where no one could twist it. My silence wasn't weakness. It was armor. Leonard exhaled, sharply, losing patience. This isn't optional, you understand. His voice hardened. He was married. His life was tied to our family. His assets, his accounts, his investments, they belonged to the marital estate. I didn't move. Sierra scoffed dramatically, rolling her eyes. She's pretending she doesn't understand. She always acted like she was more important to him than everyone else. Her tone softened into something venomous. He told me everything. He promised me everything. The first crack, the first slip in her control. And they all felt it. Patricia nudged her quietly, trying to reel her in. Too late. Her emotions were spilling, raw, and frantic. The lawyer stepped in before another outburst. We'll need to know if he moved anything. Accounts, transfers, assets. Anything that changed hands within the last 48 hours. 48 hours. The exact window of the dinner. The transfer they didn't know about. The money he trusted me with. Silence was my shield. The lawyer picked up his pen, waiting. Mrs. Blake, please. We need a response. I looked at him, finally, not with fear, but with the steadiness of a woman who is buried enough to know what silence can do. His eyes darted away first. My lack of reaction unsettled them more than anger ever could. Leonard's jaw tightened. If you refuse to cooperate, you leave us with no choice, he said. We will escalate this. Sierra leaned forward, eyes bright with something ugly. You don't want to start a fight you can't win. Still, I said nothing. The lawyer closed the folder slowly, exhaling through his nose like a man resigning himself to a difficult but necessary decision. He slid it back into his briefcase, snapped it shut, and rose from his chair. Very well, he said, adjusting his tie. If this is how you want to proceed, he looked at me directly, voice firm. We'll bring the court into this. The house was still when they left, too still, like the walls themselves were listening to the echo of their threats. I locked the door behind Leonard Hayes, Patricia, and the lawyer, then walked straight to the dining table where the journal waited beneath the folder like a quiet witness. My hands didn't shake this time when I lifted it. I had moved past shaking. I had entered a different kind of stillness, the kind that only comes when grief and suspicion merge into something sharper. I opened the journal again, but not to read this time, to examine. Every page held more than words. There were dates in the margins, faint indentations, quick lines scribbled in frustration, places where he pressed harder with his pen. I began lining everything up on the table. A page about pressure from his in-laws, dated 3 weeks before the dinner. A note about the insurance policy being updated without asking, dated 12 days before the dinner. A scribble about Sierra's sudden interest in his company valuations 9 days before. Another entry about family planning documents Leonard Hayes insisted he sign 5 days before. Page after page, detail after detail, tiny clues that meant little alone, but formed a quiet confession when placed side by side. Then I paired them with what I knew. the forged signature on that unsigned marital document, the sudden increase in his life insurance, the arguments he wrote about but never mentioned aloud, purchases on a shared account for meetings he never attended, calls from unfamiliar numbers logged in his phone history, once matched with the dates in his journal, everything aligned into a single timeline. A pattern. Their pattern. This wasn't a house of grieving in-laws. This was a house of people waiting for a transaction to finalize. I leaned back slowly, the weight of understanding pressing into me inch by inch. It didn't look like an accident. It didn't feel like an accident. It didn't move like an accident. It moved like a plan. A soft vibration buzzed across my table. I glanced at the screen, an unknown number. My breath caught for a moment before I answered. A quiet voice came through. "Mrs. Blake, it's Eric. My son's colleague. They'd worked late nights together, building a project he'd been proud of." I didn't know who else to call. He said, voice trembling, "I need to tell you something, but please don't mention my name." I closed my eyes, steadying myself. "Go ahead." He exhaled shakily. He came to my office the night. Before it happened, he asked me to look over a document, said he didn't trust it. My pulse slowed in a heavy rhythm. He signed something that night. Eric continued. He didn't want to, but they pushed him into a corner. He looked broken, ma'am, worn out, like part of him was giving up so he could keep the peace for one more day. My grip tightened on the phone. He said it didn't matter, Eric whispered. He said he'd already moved the important thing to someone he trusted completely. The important thing, the money, the transfer. I swallowed hard and thanked him. He hung up quickly, worried about being overheard. I sat for a long moment after the call ended, hands folded, breath steadying itself. My son had been fighting alone, holding secrets inside him, trying to protect me and himself at the same time until something finally crushed the space between those two intentions. I reached for the journal again, turning to the last pages, moving carefully so the fragile spine wouldn't crack further. Something slipped out from between the last two entries, thin, jagged, half torn. A piece of paper. I lifted it with 2 fingers. The edges were ripped unevenly, like it had been yanked out in a rush. A slanted line cut across the page. Half of a signature. His signature. My heart pressed painfully against my ribs. This wasn't a note. This wasn't an entry. It was evidence he tried to remove. Evidence of something he didn't want to complete. Evidence of something he was forced toward. The torn paper trembled between my fingers. By morning, the torn page felt heavier than the journal itself. I kept it inside a plastic sleeve I found in my desk drawer, not to preserve it like a keepsake, but to protect it like evidence. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I moved on instinct, quiet, steady, deliberate. There was only one person I trusted to understand what this document meant. Mr. Holt, my son Harlan's old attorney, not the family's lawyer, not Leonard Hayes' colleague, someone my son had picked years ago, back when his success was still raw and new and unclaimed by anyone else. I called his office, and the tremor in my voice made him ask me to come immediately. The sky hung gray as I drove across town. The clouds felt low, pressing against the day with the weight of something unresolved. When I stepped into the law office, the receptionist guided me to Holt's door without a question. He was already standing when I entered, Face drawn with worry, he didn't bother to hide. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said quietly. I nodded, too focused to respond with words. I placed the journal on his desk, then slid the torn page forward. He adjusted his glasses and lifted the sheet between his fingers, examining the rough edges first, then the angled line of the partial signature. His expression changed, not dramatically, just a slight tightening around the mouth, a small crease between his brows, subtle signs of someone seeing something they should never see. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "Inside his journal." He exhaled through his nose, long and low. "This," he said, tapping the page gently, "looks like part of a marital estate restructuring contract, the kind people use to transfer control of assets in case of incapacitation or death." The word death sat between us like a stone. He studied the handwriting on the torn page, Harlan's handwriting, then the edges again. Finally, he reached for a binder on the shelf behind him and flipped through a series of templates. When he placed the torn page beside one of them, the outline matched perfectly. He closed the binder slowly, the air in the room tightening. "This wasn't just pressure," he said. "This was calculated." My chest clenched. I pressed my palms against my knees to keep myself steady. Holt continued, voice dropping lower. "Your son didn't complete it. That's why it's torn. He hesitated or refused, or someone tried to make him sign, and he didn't finish." He turned the page over in his hands. "And this tear, this is clean on one side, ragged on the other. Someone pulled it out in a hurry." I stared at the paper, feeling every word land with cold precision. He set the page down and folded his hands, leaning forward. "I'm going to be honest with you. They weren't just preparing to control him. They were preparing to control everything he owned. His accounts, his company, his investments." He paused. His eyes softened, not with pity, but with respect. "They fast-tracked his death," he said quietly. "Everything in this document lines up with what families do when they want control before a will can contradict them." A chill moved through me, not shock, not disbelief, confirmation. The pieces from the journal, the pressure from Leonard Hayes, the questions from Sierra, the insurance changes, it all locked into place. I didn't speak. The silence between us wasn't the silence I used with his in-laws. This one was different. This was the silence of a mother who had crossed from mourning into clarity. Holt noticed. He reached for the journal. "May I?" I nodded. He opened it gently, flipping through pages filled with observations my son never got the chance to voice. The ink changed shade in different areas. Some entries were written neatly, others messy, rushed, like he was overwhelmed. Holt read several lines aloud under his breath, his eyes narrowing with each new detail. He closed the journal carefully and placed his hand on top of it. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steadying itself, "this isn't just a diary." He turned the journal slightly, so it faced me again. "This journal is enough to bring them down." The drive back from Mr. Holt's office was the first time I didn't cry. Not because the pain eased, but because something inside me shifted quietly, sharply, like a gear clicking into the next position. Grief had held my throat for days, squeezing until I could barely breathe. But now, a different kind of air filled my lungs. Purpose. I placed the journal on the passenger seat, beside the torn document, and watched the pages flutter in the breeze from the vent. My boy had been leaving clues without realizing it, dots scattered across weeks, almost invisible until lined up side by side. But now that I had the full picture, the fog that swallowed me since his death started to thin. They hadn't just taken advantage of him. They'd built a plan, a timeline, a strategy, and they believed no one would see it. I pulled into my driveway and cut the engine. My fingers rested on the keys for a moment before I stepped out. The sun was starting to dip, turning the sky into a mix of gold and bruise blue, the kind of evening that should have felt peaceful. It didn't. A car was parked across the street. Not mine. Not a neighbor's. I recognized it, Leonard Hayes' dark sedan. The engine was off, but the car sat angled toward my house like it was monitoring something. No one was inside. My heartbeat steadied rather than spiked. I picked up the journal, tucked it under my arm, and walked inside with slow, deliberate steps. As soon as I shut my door, I heard voices. Not in my house, across the narrow distance between mine and Harlan's home. Their windows were open just enough for sound to slip through the evening air. I moved toward the side window and cracked it silently. The voices came clearer. "We need to clean up the mess before anything leaks," Leonard Hayes said. A pause. A sigh. Footsteps. Patricia's voice followed, low and irritated. "Her silence is throwing us off. She's not scared. Something's wrong." The younger brother spoke next. His tone clipped. "She knows something. I can feel it." My fingers curled into my palm. I kept myself still, anchoring my breath. Their words didn't surprise me. They confirmed what I already sensed. They weren't grieving. They were scrambling. More footsteps. Chairs shifting. "We need to secure what's ours," Leonard muttered. "The contract is useless without verification. There has to be another way." Another way. Their desperation wasn't speculation anymore. It was audible, sharp, coordinated. I let their voices fade and stepped back from the window. My pulse was steady again. Not calmer, sharper. I grabbed my purse and locked my house, crossing the small yard that separated our homes. Their front door was cracked open, as if someone had stepped out and planned to return quickly. The hall light spilled onto the porch. I stood in the doorway and listened. Their voices were deeper inside, arguing in hushed tones. No one was near the entrance. This wasn't about courage. This was about truth. I stepped inside, quietly, and followed the faint murmurs to the living room. But I didn't enter. I didn't need to. Something else caught my eye first. The dining table. Papers. Stacks of them. Folders left open. Pages spread out like a storm had passed through. They hadn't expected me or anyone to walk in. They'd gotten comfortable, sloppy, and sitting right there on the table, pinned under a ceramic coaster, was a packet of insurance documents. I recognized the font immediately, the layout, the formatting, and then I saw it, the signature at the bottom. Harlan's name, but not his handwriting. A forged signature. Clean, practiced, confident. They hadn't even bothered to hide it well. My throat tightened, not with grief this time, but with a rising, controlled fury I hadn't felt before. I reached slowly into my purse and pulled out my phone. My hand didn't tremble as I angled the camera over the papers. Click. One photo. Click. Another. Click. Closer this time, framing the forged signature and the date printed beside it. The date. The night before he died. Air thinned around me, Everything inside me hardened into something clear and unshakable. I took one final photo, making sure every detail was captured. Then I slipped silently back toward the door, just as footsteps moved closer in the hallway. I stepped outside and pulled the door gently behind me. My phone buzzed softly with the last image. Insurance papers. Forged. Dated. Documented. They sent the message early the next morning. A formal-sounding text from Leonard Hayes. Family meeting. 3 p.m. Our attorney will be present. Attendance required. Required. Like I belonged beneath their authority. Like I was supposed to obey them. I stared at the message until the words lost shape. Not out of fear. Those days were behind me, but because the tone revealed everything they believed about me. They thought I was still the same woman from the funeral. The quiet, crumpled mother with swollen eyes and trembling hands. The woman who sat in silence while they circled her like vultures. But silence is not always submission. Sometimes it's strategy. At 2:59, I walked into the Hayes living room alone. The air was thick with perfume, cologne, and arrogance. Chairs were arranged in a circle, but one seat sat lower than the rest. They wanted me in that one. I stayed standing. Leonard Hayes sat upright, legs crossed neatly, hands folded on his knee like a man about to negotiate a merger. Patricia Hayes perched beside him, tapping her nails against the armrest. Their daughter, Sierra, sat stiffly, lips pressed into a thin line, eyes cold. And the same lawyer from earlier waited with a folder on his lap, ready to perform. "You're late," Sierra said. "I arrived 1 minute early. I didn't answer." Leonard cleared his throat. "Let's begin. We've been patient, but this cannot continue. There are legal matters that must be addressed." The lawyer opened his folder. Cooperation is the only way to avoid escalation. Their confidence didn't match their panic. They said legal too often. They leaned on the lawyer too hard. They hid their desperation beneath polished voices and crossed legs. But I could see it, fear wrapped in superiority. "We need access to every account your son Harlan touched," Leonard said, tone clipped. "All transfers, all passwords, all financial activity." Patricia nodded sharply. "It's our right." Sierra lifted her chin. "He told me everything belonged to us. You don't get to hide anything." I stayed still. The lawyer sighed, tapping his pen. "Your silence is making this unnecessarily complicated." I let it continue. Sierra leaned forward, her voice trembling with frustration. "You're being emotional again. This is why we need to handle the finances. You're not capable of making rational decisions right now." Patricia echoed her. "You're grieving, dear. You should let the people who understand money take care of things." Leonard added softly, "This isn't personal. It's practical. You don't have the background to manage large assets." There it was. The mockery, the condescension, the polished cruelty. I didn't blink. The lawyer slid another paper toward me. "We're giving you one last opportunity to cooperate before we proceed legally." Sierra crossed her arms. "Stop pretending you didn't know he planned everything with us. He promised me the estate. He promised me the accounts. He promised me security." Leonard nodded vigorously. "Your involvement complicates a process that should have been simple." Patricia tilted her head. "We tried to include you, but you don't understand how these things work. Threats wrapped in concern, mockery wrapped in pity. Demands disguised as conversations. Their voices blended into a single rhythm, entitlement humming beneath every word. I stayed silent because silence was the only thing they didn't know how to fight. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Mrs., this will go to court if you refuse to engage. You're creating unnecessary barriers. I took a slow breath, not shaky, not weak, just steady enough to clear the fog around me. Then I moved. No dramatic gestures, no raised voice, no trembling hands. I reached into my purse and placed something on the table, flat, deliberate, final. The journal. Its worn cover seemed to darken the entire room. The lawyer blinked. Leonard stiffened. Sierra's breath hitched. Patricia's hand froze mid-tap. Every voice stopped. Every posture changed. Every mask cracked. Leonard whispered, almost involuntarily, "What is that?" I didn't answer. I simply let the weight of the journal speak for me. The journal sat in the center of the table, like a wound slowly opening. They stared at it as if it might bleed. No one spoke. Leonard Hayes' jaw twitched. Sierra's fingers curled tightly around the arm of her chair. Even the lawyer, always poised, leaned forward just slightly, calculating, uneasy. I opened the journal with a calm that didn't belong to the woman I had been 2 days ago. My hand moved slowly, deliberately, as though every page carried a truth that deserved to be witnessed with care. I stopped on the first entry that mattered. My voice was low but steady as I read aloud. They asked me again what I'm worth. Why is it suddenly important? Sierra's eyes widened. Patricia Hayes froze mid-blink. I turned the page. Insurance policy updated again today. No explanation. Not my request. Leonard Hayes sat up straighter, clearing his throat as if preparing to interrupt. I continued before he could breathe enough air to lie. Father-in-law pushing documents. Family planning, he says, doesn't feel right. A thin line cracked through Sierra's composure. The lawyer opened his mouth, but I lifted my hand, silencing him without a word. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush. I let every sentence land exactly where it needed to. I turned another page. She wants my passwords. Says it's for emergencies. Why now? Sierra shifted violently in her chair, her face flushing a deep, guilty red. Another page. They keep asking what assets I control personally. Pressure feels wrong. Their confidence unraveled like a thread pulled too fast. I set the journal down a moment, not closed, not hidden, just resting, and looked at them one by one. Their expressions had drained of color, their arrogance dissolving into something small, thin, fragile. Then I flicked to the page dated 5 days before the dinner. Insurance changed again. Higher payout. Didn't approve it. Leonard tried to speak. This is out of context. I slid a set of printed photographs across the table before he finished. The insurance papers, the forged signature, the date stamped clearly. The lawyer reached for the photos quickly, almost desperately, as if grabbing them faster would somehow change what was on them. His face tightened when he saw the signature. My son's name, but not Harlan's handwriting. I turned another page. He wants me to sign something tomorrow. No choice, he says. I feel trapped. Sierra gasped softly. Her father shot her a warning look, but she couldn't hide the crack running through her composure. Patricia finally found her voice. You're twisting things, she whispered. I ignored her. page after page, entry after entry. The journal unfolded a pattern they never expected anyone to piece together. The pressure, the questions, the sudden interest in money, the insurance increases, the forged documents, the arguments behind closed doors, the phone calls, the late-night movements, the final request for him to sign something important, their own footsteps mapped in ink. The lawyer swallowed hard. These entries could be interpreted different ways. I reached into my purse again and placed something else on the table, a plastic sleeve containing the torn document. The half signature. Their lawyer stared at it, eyes narrowing, dread settling into the lines of his face. He didn't want to sign it. I said quietly. He tore the page out. Leonard Hayes surged forward. That proves nothing. I met his eyes. Calm, unmoving. Then I turned to the last entry, the one dated the night of the dinner. The ink was darker, pressed harder into the paper. They want me to sign it tonight. But the money is safe with Mom now. Sierra's breath broke. Patricia covered her mouth. Leonard's eyes flashed with panic. He couldn't hide. Their lawyer closed his folder slowly, defeated already. I lowered the journal gently, smoothing the edge of the page with my thumb. My voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It simply carried the truth. My son didn't live long enough to say himself. You planned to take everything, I said softly, but he saved it with me. For a moment, no one breathed. The journal lay open between us like a verdict. The photographs of forged signatures glared under the lamp. And the in-laws, 3 people who walked into this room, believing they owned every inch of power, now sat frozen, stripped of every layer of confidence they had wrapped themselves in. Sierra's face was pale, her lips trembling as if she couldn't decide whether to defend herself or faint. Patricia Hayes clutched her purse so tightly the leather buckled. Leonard Hayes, usually composed, authoritative, looked like someone had knocked the ground out from under him. Even their lawyer wasn't pretending anymore. A bead of sweat slid down his temple. He wiped it quickly, then fumbled for a pen. He couldn't seem to hold steady. He scribbled notes that had no direction, the kind that people write when they're trying to outrun panic. This is being misinterpreted. Leonard said finally, but his voice was hollow, shaky. Nothing like the man who barked demands at me 2 days ago. I didn't answer. He swallowed hard and looked at the lawyer for help. The lawyer straightened, cleared his throat, and tried to steady himself. These entries are unverified, he began. Handwriting, personal interpretations. We don't know the full context. I reached slowly into my purse. His sentence collapsed. I pulled out another envelope, thin, folded twice for privacy, the handwriting on the front neat and careful. I placed it on the table beside the journal. Leonard stared at it like it might ignite. "What is that?" he croaked. I opened the envelope and slid out a single page. The room leaned forward without meaning to. "This," I said quietly, "is from the neighbor who saw Harlan pacing outside the house the night before he died. The same neighbor who watched him clutch his chest in fear. The same neighbor who saw someone else near the garage." Sierra jerked upright. "That's a lie." Patricia grabbed her arm. "Stop," she whispered. Leonard's eyes narrowed to slits. "What neighbor?" I turned the page around so the writing faced them. The statement wasn't long. It didn't need to be. At approximately 11:34 p.m., I saw Mr. Harlan Blake pacing on the sidewalk, talking on the phone. A black sedan pulled up near the garage. The driver exited, went toward the side of the house, and stayed for several minutes. I recognized the man. It was his father-in-law, Leonard Hayes. The widow gasped. Her mother's hand flew to her mouth. Leonard's face drained completely. Their lawyer stopped breathing. He took the paper from the table with trembling fingers, scanning the handwriting as if hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something harmless. They called it an accident, I said softly. But he wasn't alone that night. Leonard slammed his palm on the table. No, I wasn't. This doesn't mean. He fell apart mid-sentence, not from grief, from fear. A long, suffocating silence filled the room. No one dared break it. Every direction they could run, emotionally, legally, verbally, had closed. The lawyer's breathing grew shallow. He wiped his forehead again, smearing the sheen of sweat across his skin. All of this, he tried, voice barely holding, this is circumstantial. We can't make assumptions. I looked at him. Just one calm, steady look. He dropped his eyes immediately. Patricia Hayes whispered shakily, "We didn't mean for anything to happen. We just needed," her husband snapped, "enough." But the damage was done. Her half-confession hung in the air. The lawyer scribbled faster now, his pen squeaking across the page. "This is getting out of hand," he muttered, mostly to himself. "This meeting wasn't supposed to escalate." I said nothing. I didn't have to. The journal, the photos, the witness statement, they spoke louder than any woman's tears ever could. And for the first time, they realized they weren't fighting a grieving mother. They were facing a truth they could no longer outrun. The lawyer's voice dropped to a faint whisper, not for me, but for them. "We need to stop this meeting right now." The meeting didn't end with raised voices or slammed doors. It ended with something far quieter, fear settling into the corners of the room, crawling up their spines, tightening like rope. When I left the Hayes house, I didn't walk fast. I walked steady, holding the journal close to my chest the way my son must have held his worry. By sunrise the next morning, everything had shifted. Mr. Holt called before I finished my first cup of tea. "Bring everything," he said. "Now." His voice held urgency, not panic, not confusion. Urgency with purpose. I gathered the journal, the plastic sleeve with the torn document, the pictures of the forged signature, and the neighbor's statement. I placed them neatly into a clear folder. Evidence deserved order. At Holt's office, he had already assembled a team: insurance investigators, a financial analyst, and a retired police captain who reviewed suspicious deaths. Papers spread across the table like puzzle pieces finding their places. One investigator lifted the insurance documents with gloved hands. "This signature isn't Harlan's," she said immediately. "It's too smooth, too practiced. Someone traced his style." Another examined the torn contract. The pressure marks show hesitation. He started signing and stopped abruptly. That's consistent with coercion. The financial analyst spread bank statements across the desk, long lines of deposits, withdrawals, and attempts logged on evenings my son had written about feeling pressured. Each timestamp matched his journal entries perfectly. The retired captain leaned over everything, studying quietly. "This isn't a civil issue," he murmured. "This is financial entrapment, possibly homicide. They crossed too many lines." Holt glanced at me. Are you ready for this? I nodded. I had crossed the line between grief and fire the moment I realized my son died fighting alone. There was no going back. They gathered everything into boxes and sealed them. Holt drove the first one himself to the precinct. I followed in my car, my hand steady on the wheel. It didn't feel like I was walking into a war. It felt like I was bringing my son's truth to the surface where it always belonged. At the station, officers met us at the door and ushered us into a private room. They reviewed every page, every photo, every timestamp. Detectives asked questions in low, measured tones. When did he write this entry? When did you find this? When did you overhear them talking? When did you photograph this? The timeline tightened around Leonard Hayes and his family like a noose. The forged insurance, the marital asset agreement, the witness statement placing Leonard at the garage, the pressure recorded in Harlan's own handwriting. Piece by piece, greed exposed itself. By late afternoon, the precinct buzzed with movement. Officers made copies. Investigators moved in and out of rooms with urgency sharpened by outrage. Holt placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. You did everything right, he said. I stepped outside for a moment, needing air. The sky was soft and muted. Clouds stretched thin across the horizon. The courthouse sat across from the station, its stone steps glinting under the fading light. I walked a few paces away from the door, letting the wind brush against my face. In that quiet break between everything I had lived and everything that was about to unfold, I felt something, not peace, presence, my son, not in voice, not in shadow, just a warmth that wasn't there the days before. The kind that settles behind your ribs, the kind that lets you breathe deeper. I'm doing this for you, I whispered. It wasn't a promise. It was a declaration. Footsteps echoed behind me. Officers rushed out in coordinated lines, heading toward a row of unmarked cars. Holt stepped beside me, nodding toward the activity. They're executing warrants, he said. My heart tightened, not from fear, but from justice rising. Minutes later, 2 squad cars pulled up in front of the Hayes house. Officers stepped out. Voices rose. Doors slammed open. Shouts followed. And then Leonard Hayes emerged from the doorway, hands cuffed behind his back, eyes wide with the shock of consequences he never expected to face. Peace doesn't arrive loudly. It comes like a soft hand on your back, steadying you after a storm that nearly took your breath away. Weeks passed, and the noise around the case dimmed. Investigations deepened. Court dates formed. Lawyers circled the Hayes family the way they once circled me. I didn't follow every update. I didn't need to. Justice had momentum now, and I trusted it to run its course. I didn't speak badly of them. Not once. Not to the police. Not to reporters. Not to neighbors. I told the truth and let the law do what the law knew how to do. Instead, I focused on the only thing left in my control, honoring the boy who trusted me completely until his last breath. My son, Harlan. The money he transferred, his final act of protection, didn't sit in my account quietly. I couldn't leave it there. Not when it came from fear, from urgency, from the last spark of hope he held in those trembling hands under the dinner table. I met with advisors for weeks, spoke with mentors, spoke with Mr. Holt, spoke with people who had built legacies out of pain and turned them into blessings. By the end of it, one thing felt right. only one. A foundation, in his name, dedicated to helping young creators and innovators like him. People who had big dreams, but small beginnings. People who needed a push, not a trap. I named it after him, his first and middle name, no mention of tragedy, no shadow of what he endured. Just light, just possibility. The morning it launched, I stood quietly in the back of a small ceremony, watching the first recipients speak on stage. Their excitement cracked something open in me. Not sorrow, something cleaner, something fuller. I didn't want applause. I didn't want attention. I just wanted Harlan's legacy to breathe. Later that week, I drove to the cemetery with the journal in my bag. The path to his grave was familiar now, the soft curve of the walkway, the tall oak that shaded the corner, the flowers other visitors left for their own loved ones. My steps slowed as I approached the stone with his name carved clean and deep. The wind stirred around me, gentle, carrying the faint scent of cut grass. I knelt beside him and placed the journal on my lap. My thumb traced the worn edges, the soft creases on the cover. The first page opened easily, like it knew why I'd brought it back. His handwriting, young, hopeful, stretched across the page. I think Mom would be proud of me today. I got the promotion. Gonna take her out to dinner soon. She's been working too hard. I like who I'm becoming. My breath caught on that last line. This was Harlan before the pressure, before the questions, before the contracts, before Leonard Hayes cornered him with forms he didn't want to sign, before fear crawled into his chest. This was my boy, unburdened, ambitious, standing in the light of his own becoming. I read the entry aloud, letting my voice drift into the air, letting him hear it again, letting myself hear it again. When I finished, I pressed the journal against my heart for a long moment, then lowered it slowly onto the grass beneath his headstone. It lay there softly, like a final truth returning home. I'm leaving this with you, I whispered. Every page, every fear, every clue, you trusted me with all of it. And I carried it exactly the way you asked me to. A breeze swept across my cheeks, cool, steady, comforting. I closed my eyes and let the warmth in my chest settle into something permanent, something like peace. When I stood, I smoothed the grass around the journal, straightened the flowers, and rested my hand once more on the stone that bore Harlan Blake's name. Then, softly, with all the strength I had left, you trusted me with your truth, and I protected it